All right, welcome to our impromptu Zoom, our informal, unofficial discussion amongst ethics bowl enthusiasts. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about appropriately using artificial intelligence for ethics bowl prep. I'm your host, Matt Deaton of ethicsbowl.org. My co-host is also Michael from ethicsbowl.org. And in just a second, I'm going to share my screen and go through a little bit of a presentation. I'm going to set the stage, talk about context just a little bit, and get into some of the benefits of using artificial intelligence for ethics bowl preparation. So can anyone confirm that you can now see my screen?
Yep.
All right, very good, very good. So there's the title, CheatBot or SuperTutor. I'll take credit for that crafty title, but really it boils down to ChatGPT or any of these generative large language artificial intelligence models for ethics bowl and primarily ethics bowl preparation. And one question might be, why are we talking about this now? Well, ChatGPT came out, became part of the public consciousness of artificial intelligence. Lots of people have been thinking and talking about it for some time, but that's when it really hit the pop culture. And we know that teams are using it. It has to be the case. Students are using it. A lot of folks have their head in the sand, but I know that it's happening. And we've not had any official guidance, I don't think anyway, from National High School Ethics Bowl or IEB. And this is understandable. I mean, it's hard to say what we should encourage teams to do or to not do. The educational community has been caught off guard by this. Many institutions still don't know what to say about what constitutes cheating, what constitutes appropriate, proper use, beneficial use. And also, we have regional competitions in the National High School Ethics Bowl coming up in the next few weeks. If you go to the website, you're going to see that the vast majority are going to happen in the next few weeks. There'll be a handful happen already. We've got the National High School Ethics Bowl national competition happening in April. We've missed the IEB regional competitions, but the national competition is coming up at API late next month. And so that's what we're talking about this now. Now, we're tabling most artificial intelligence related questions. These may come up, and that's okay, but for most purposes, we're going to set aside questions of bias, privacy, concerns about weapon systems, hacking, vulnerability, political system manipulation, the future of work, deep fakes, the implications of AI sentience, and also the singularity, aka the alignment problem, aka when artificial general intelligence learns to self-improve its own code. Watch out, we're setting most of that stuff aside. And the conversation is really within the general conversation of how to use artificial intelligence appropriately for education. And so this is something that is decreasing, I think, the need for human teachers. And so that's one reason educators like myself are a little bit nervous about this. It also has made various forms of cheating much easier. And everybody can make sure you're muted. I got a little bit of background noise there. So I'm going to mute some folks here. You can unmute in just a second. So it can also make cheating much easier. It's much harder to detect plagiarism generated by an artificial intelligence large language model versus classic plagiarism. Plagiarism. You could just simply take some phrases, do a Google search. Oh, right, here's where you pulled that from. If you ask ChatGPT to write your paper for you, it may be obvious to the trained eye that this was not a human author, but very difficult to prove. And also, as I mentioned, decreasing the need for human teachers and also increasing the need to teach students how to properly use artificial intelligence, because most anything that you can do on your own, you can do better with AI assistance. And so those who learn how to leverage it properly and leverage it well are going to have an advantage over everyone else, I think, in most fields. Now, how can we use this specifically as an aid for students of all kinds? Well, to make the brief positive case for this, as a super tutor, it's on demand. You don't have to go to a particular class time. You don't have to go to specific office hours. You can pull this stuff up at 1 in the morning if you're inquisitive and interested, you have the time. It has an unmatched knowledge base. It has reviewed, what that constitutes in terms of artificial intelligence, I'm not sure, but it's had access to and reviewed hundreds of thousands of articles, books. I mean, just imagine the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online. I've only looked at small sections of that, but these things have reviewed every bit of it and have it at their fingertips to re-review. Unmatched stamina. It doesn't get tired in terms of studying fatigue, doesn't get tired in terms of having heard one too many questions, not able to continue a conversation. It can go on for as long as you would like to. It's free, or at least there are free versions. You can upgrade in many cases, but the free versions are more than adequate. It's non-judgmental. You can ask a question that you might worry that others would consider stupid or taboo. And since it's non-judgmental and private, you don't have to worry that it's going to disagree with you in terms of its political or moral affiliations or think less of you. It'll coach you up and answer your question no matter how stupid or how weird. In terms of an ethics educator, or a tool that we can use for teams to help coach Ethics Bowl, it can teach ethical theory. It can find, summarize, illustrate, and clarify arguments, articles, entire books, entire types of philosophy, entire concepts. Hey, ChatGPT, help me understand political philosophy. Okay, what type of political philosophy? Well, libertarianism versus Rawlsism. And what about contemporary Marxism? And let's apply that to a particular issue. And let's back up and look at the foundations. How does this contrast with utilitarianism? You can do every bit of it. If you can ask the right questions, it will give you very thorough answers. For Ethics Bowl, we can draft a full case analysis. Michael's going to talk a little bit about some of the prompts that he's fed ChatGPT recently in order to deliver a full presentation script. It can answer discussion questions that are usually included right there with the case set. It can analyze a draft argument that perhaps a team puts together and thinks this is a good argument. ChatGPT, can you help us think about its weaknesses, how we might make it better? It can also simulate another team for the commentary period or the judges Q&A, do all those fantastic things. And just as a very basic example of what it can do, it can run a utilitarian analysis. Now, this isn't a perfect analysis, but if you're familiar with utilitarianism, one of the most tedious things, and I found one of the most emotionally difficult things, is to assign actual numbers to those pleasure and pain variants when it comes to various options. Well, I asked ChatGPT, hey, can you help me run a utilitarian analysis on the benefits and the drawbacks of using you, ChatGPT, for ethics bowl preparation? And so I said, okay, let's list some of the benefits and the drawbacks. Let's add some draft numbers. And even if we don't agree with these draft numbers, we can always go back and revise them. But I've found that if you can just get that initial analysis out there, it's much easier to tweak that than to get that first analysis out on your own. Something that's both scary and promising is that if you give it the right prompt, this stuff can draft an entire ethics bowl presentation script. It can anticipate objections and draft a full response in terms of the script, and also anticipate judge questions and draft response scripts. It's not going to be able to anticipate the actual judge questions, but if the team had enough time and interest, it sure could draft a lot of stuff. Now, on the one hand, this is worrisome. On the one hand, you might worry that a lazy team would just type in the URL for the case set, say, give me a bunch of scripts and a bunch of things to say back to judges, and I'll cram the weekend before or the night before the competition. The team will just go and regurgitate all that. I think the fact that we have live judges that can ask direct questions, and I think the fact that we have teams that ask questions through commentary, I think that's going to expose teams that rely on that sort of a strategy. But they certainly could be very lazy. On the other hand, it serves as a great equalizer. You've got teams out there that have access to trained ethicists that teach dedicated philosophy classes. You have teams that have access to fantastic, marvelous coaches such as Michael, and you've got teams that have to settle for crummy coaches like myself. And so what this does is it equalizes the playing field in terms of teams being able to have very high quality coaching. Now, would I prefer, all else equal, to have Michael over ChatGPT? Yes, but most teams don't have that option. The vast majority of the teams across the country, especially as we continue to expand, are going to have access to experienced, dedicated coaches. And so that's a huge benefit, I think. All right, so now I'll pause just for a second, and I'll turn it over to Michael to talk a little bit about some of the scripts that he's been able to generate using various prompts, and then also to talk about some of the drawbacks. He gives us some good discussion questions as well. And Michael, are you able to share your screen? And I think you're muted right now.
Sorry, not yet. It says that you've disabled it at this point.
Okay, I've disabled your ability to share. Let me click something here. So I'm going to make you a host. So you want to make Michael a host? Yes, I do.
Okay. Okay, great. Can you see this all right?
I got it.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Matt, for your very kind thoughts and helpful opening presentation on this. I share a lot of your enthusiasm for the potential positives. And so I've entitled my script here, A Skeptic's View. And so let me just show you some sample things that I have toyed around with. And I'm working on my 5th experiment right now where I've gone through and asked ChatGPT to generate a model script using carefully worded prompts. These are all going to be uploaded to ethicsbowl.org. And I think some of them that are there already. And so the one that Matt asked me to talk about, a few of these that I thought were good exemplars, perhaps, and then some that might be an example of poor output. So to give you an example of one of the prompts that I did, first of all, this has been a learning journey. One of the things I've realized is that ChatGPT, if you give it too detailed of instructions all at once, it will kind of forget and it will go with the most recent entered item on your prompt set. And so what I said was study the following ethics bowl case and provide a 6-minute presentation script on each of the 3 discussion questions at the bottom. You have to upload the text of the case itself, followed by the discussion questions. And then I gave it a series of checklisted items. Consider at least 2 counter arguments, for example, and so on. And you can read these in more detail on your own. I included in these experiment articles subsequent user prompts that I had to use to get some more quality output from it. And here's an example of an opening script. And all of this, except for a very few minor word choices here and there that I tinkered with, as well as the formatting, I did all on my own. It kind of outputs it regularly in just a big text block, separated by, paragraph breaks. So, but what I thought was interesting is I asked it to generate at least two arguments for each position in support of the discussion, give a clear position statement. I thought this was interesting. I asked it to designate the underlying moral appeal that the argument relied on, and then also to break up the arguments into syllogistic form. Curiously, a weakness for this particular directive is that it usually only gives you a 2 premise and conclusion argument each time. And even when you push it to generate implicit premises in an argument, they tend to be rather general. I'll say a little bit more about that here in a minute. I asked it to generate supporting examples, and in another one, I asked it to generate both a hypothetical example and then an example from the historical record, and it did a pretty good job on that. In this particular one, I asked it to rely on 2 example philosophers that might comment on it. And in this case, it pulled John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant. Interestingly, it arranged them in a kind of for and against right here. And that nicely goes into the counter arguments, which it did a similar thing, stated the position, underlying moral appeal, and broke up the argument. I wanted students to see models of reasoning with this. And you can tell already that this script is getting to the point where it's way beyond 6 minutes, where I eventually decided that that was fine, and I would use this as a discussion item with the students. I'd use it as a study tool and just as a model for learning about possible positions on the case. And certainly, if someone were to read this entire script aloud, it would be much, much longer than 6 minutes, of course. But it gives students an opportunity to maybe consider some perspectives that they hadn't thought about. as well as some counter arguments, perhaps, to their position that they generated. I also asked it to analyze the conflicting moral values in the case, trying to get at criterion 1B, where this is where, at least in my experience, both as a judge in the bowl and over numerous bowls and as a coach, most students aren't able to really talk about what the criteria call the central moral dimension of the case very well. They're not able to usually articulate what kind of moral appeals that the arguments that they're presenting rely on. And this, I thought, was interesting, although oftentimes really general. On the other hand, if you're a brand new student to ethics, this might be something that really helps you to move your thinking that much further down the road. So this is an example of a script where I thought it did a pretty good job in some areas. And it does this for all 3 discussion questions. I'm not going to scroll through the whole thing, but let's go back to my PowerPoint here. Let's see, how can I get back here? No. Hold on, Matt. I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. You might be able to share a particular screen and then drag the PowerPoint over to that screen if nothing else.
Yeah. Maybe if I hit escape here. There we go. My bar at the top is in the way. It's the problem. There we go. Okay. So some concerns, like questions I have with this. First concern I have is that novice ethics bowl students may lack the capacity for critical evaluation. When an AI tool generates misleading or distorting output, in some cases, even factually incorrect output, which I've noticed a few times. And I think an interesting discussion question for us here is what prerequisite understanding is needed in order to guide an AI tool to generate material that is genuinely helpful. Another concern that I have is that students leaning heavily on an AI generators for ethics bowl scripts are likely to lose sight of what I consider to be one of the most important characteristics of an ethics bowl activity. That is learning how to think for yourself, to discover what you care about, forming your own sense of autonomy and agency. So some questions on this point that we might think about as coaches and ethics bowl organizers. What sort of guidance from ethics bowl organizers and coaches is needed to help students realize the limits, the pitfalls, and the temptations of AI generators? And then also, how can we encourage students to see the benefits of relying on their own capacities? The third concern I had is that when you first play around with these tools, you tend to be quite amazed by the encyclopedic and prolific quality that they have. They're able to generate these scripts in a matter of seconds. It's just astonishing. And why that may be true, ChatGPT's output for ethical scripts is often limited in the register of the language and also, most importantly, lacking context. So I've noticed a lot of formulaic word choices or predictable syntax. It's often overly wordy. And then when you're interested in looking at models of reasoning, it tends to give bare minimum logical reasoning examples. So a question that I thought about for this is, are the models of writing and reasoning offered up by ChatGPT representative of the expectations for the workplaces or the learning communities that students are aiming for? And are these models diverse and robust enough, reflecting the kinds of creative interpretations and subtlety that that make for really good, nuanced ethics bowl presentations? A fourth concern I have, my final concern here, is the ethics frameworks often presented by ChatGPT tend to rely, at least in my limited experience, on more rational formulaic positions, but less so on those ethical frameworks requiring what I would call emotional wisdom or analysis of the social context or the power dynamics of the case. So, for example, you tend to see a lot of Kantian, utilitarian, or contractarian ethical arguments, and the virtue ethics or care ethics lenses on a case tend to be rather thin. So the question that came up for me here was, how can we help students to recognize and counteract these inherent philosophical biases in ChatGPT's output? And this is especially a concern for ethics bowl programs like ours, which it's a volunteer extracurricular after-school club, and we really don't have that much time to teach these frameworks in some depth. And my understanding, at least with our local bowl here, is that's the case for a lot of the teams going to the Oregon Bowl, which we participate in across the river in Portland. And I can especially think this would be a hurdle for brand new coaches who themselves don't know a lot about, have a lot of experience with ethical frameworks. So some other questions I thought about. This is from Alex Sager, the organizer from the Oregon Bowl. He said, are there resources for effective prompt engineering? Are there resources for effective prompt engineering that will enhance teams' critical and ethical thinking? And I think what he's thinking about here with this question is, are those resources readily available? And as a follow-up to that, I know a hurdle that Alex faces is, and most bowl organizers face, is how to properly train judges to know how to interpret the criteria correctly. I have to do a shout out to Jeannie because I use her judges training video with my students all the time. And nice job, Jeannie, for that. Thank you for generating that particular video. And it's great. That particular video is really good for training students as well. So in particular here, judges need to be able to recognize seemingly manufactured language in teams' presentation, and then subsequently probe for authentic or well-considered positions or replies to questions in the conversations, as opposed to those that are clearly scripted and rehearsed. Another question concerning equity and access. Now, we know that for a committee that I was on a few months ago, this is a concern for the national organization, particularly because they've been doing outreach to more rural schools where there isn't necessarily a teacher who has much familiarity with philosophy or ethics. And they're trying to get an ethics bowl team started there. So in some of those schools, you know, computer access can be a bit tricky. So if we see a wider use of this kind of tool for preparing for case analysis and preparing for the competition, will there be an inherent discrepancy between schools who have access to maybe strong internet connections or to computers, and therefore the schools that do have an advantage? So if those concerns are significant, what steps are needed by the community to counteract these potentially detrimental inequities? Another thing that I think is a useful question is, how can we engage students themselves to help us, organizers, coaches, set the standards for authentic and meaningful use of these generators? So Matt, I do have a draft guideline, but I know that you maybe don't want to get into that yet. So I'll end my presentation there and send it back to you as we maybe enter the conversation phase of this discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Michael, for the very thorough coverage of those drawbacks, and also for sharing all of all those outcomes you were able to generate using those prompts. I think that folks will be able to build on those. And one of my hopes is that over the next 30 minutes, we'll be able to figure out some draft prompts, guidance we might be able to give to the community, and also some guidance for teams to use AI generators appropriately, ethically, et cetera. But you're exactly right. I'd like to open it up for the broader conversation. And I know it's the case we've covered a great deal, and I suspect that Janine or Chris or Dick or Greg have a particular question they would like for us to go ahead and tackle or a comment. So open it up to the rest of the group now. Everybody's understandably shy because not only you're on camera, but
Yeah.
you're
Well,
also to be recorded, right? Or Angela as well. Sorry, Angela.
Yeah, I'm willing to throw out a question just because I think that final question about how can we engage students to help set the standard for using AI and ChatGPT is particularly powerful. Because I know even for my middle school students, kids are already using this, and they're using it to, there's a site I think called Dumb It Down. So they're using that one to help make sense of concepts more easily. They're running arguments already. I mean, these are 7th graders. And what I see is that for those students who are already engaged, they're going to use it to enhance their thinking, but they also don't see why they would not use it to enhance their thinking. It's there. Why wouldn't you use it? So in some ways, I don't know if they're even asking the questions that we're asking or have the concerns that we do. So how can we get them to be more engaged? What standards are needed? And then how do we get their buy-in?
Yeah, that was one of the purposes of this particular session was to get the conversation going, maybe share it with some other folks in the ethics bowl community, and then hopefully organically when they arrive at the regional competitions, the national competitions, at least those competitors and coaches will talk about this in between rounds or over lunch, et cetera. But I think there's even more needed to pull them into the conversation. It could be something led by a National High School Ethics Bowl. It could be something through their social media, additional forums with a much wider audience. This was just a very small invitation, intimate, kickstarting group. But I think an even broader conversation, maybe something that could be a record online would also be helpful. Do others have thoughts on that, or are there other questions or other areas of interest you want to take the conversation towards? Yes, Janine.
So thank you for these 2 presentations. They're extremely provocative. I appreciate your doing all this work. I just have 2 comments. One is my concern that about the reasoning together. I think that one of the things that's really important for coaches and organizers to remember is that we need to link into democratic values, including trying to have students work through their disagreements, even if they're using AI, in order to come to some sort of consensus. So that I also think in this conversation, we need to include some kind of guideline regarding whether we are using this technology and tool to enhance democratic values, where we are reasoning and talking together, even though we disagree with each other. That would be my comment.
So that could possibly be built into the guidance is however it's used. Do what you can. Do what you
And
can.
it's different than civil dialogue. We have this 5-point civil dialogue, but I think that internally within teams, there's a great deal of disagreement, and then they have to come to some sort of consensus, and these tools can help with that, but students themselves have to engage with that process. And I definitely agree with the idea that students themselves have to be involved in this. And I will give you a link to Merv Hickok, is the associate director of the Center for AI and Digital Policy. And she is a lecturer at the School of Information periodically at at the University of Michigan. and she is very interested in youth becoming engaged. And there are 2 organizations, and Code Justice is one of them. And I can't remember the other one, but I just throw that out, that there are youth organizations that are very intrigued with trying to become engaged and be part of this discussion.
Good, good. That's encouraging that there are many folks that are already attempting to tackle that. And I've started taking some notes. I'll share that just to make sure. I've got to get you to make me a host, I think, Michael. Whenever you do that, I'll share the notes there. But it was to ask students to remember those democratic values or virtues of democratic deliberation, even when using these tools, strive for respectful consensus building. And it sounds like there's some folks already pushing that specifically for AI, specifically for students. That's excellent news. All right, would anyone like to build off of that or take the conversation in a different direction? And Richard, as a coach that I respect very much with your background and experience and how enthusiastic you switched from debate over to ethics bowl, I'm very much interested in your perspective on this. Anything in the ballpark that's related. So if you don't mind, I'll put you on the spot and ask if what's at the top of your mind when it comes to this.
I mean, when I look at it, some of my ethical concerns have to do with shortcutting the educational process. I can see 2 really unproblematic uses that make a lot of sense to me. The first is sort of what this case analysis thing is doing, is it's just, if it's functioning as a rough draft, and I think it has to function as a rough draft because it's incredibly verbose, it's never going to fit into 10 minutes, and it would be educational malpractice to have students practicing and memorizing this kind of a draft. But if they see it as a rough draft that has some ideas that they can build on and expand, and I don't know about other people's teams, but for our presentations, you have to get the other people on the team to buy into it. So I think that if you have people defaulting to the AI generated draft, that would be terrible. And you want to, remind them that it's just a machine cranking out answers. It hasn't touched necessarily on all of the things that really matter. That there are things that, by virtue of how the algorithms function, there are things that aren't going to show up, things like virtues, things like care ethics, things like the perspective of people who aren't white and live in San Francisco, for God's sake, because just looking at the script that was generated on the nuclear deterrence question, there were just so many issues that were flat out missing from any sort of a comprehensive analysis. And that's a product, I think, of the kinds of literature that the machine was trained on. The other thing I think is really valuable from the standpoint of, and very difficult to coach, is that middle 5 minutes of the presentation where a team has to practice responding to some other team's presentation. And it seems to me that it'd be very, very useful to see it as a practice dummy. And the advantage of teaching them to respond to this machine generated draft is a way of reminding them that they are smarter than their practice dummy by virtue of some of the things that we have that the machine can never have. I think that, I think a good discussion can be had with the students about the importance of emotion in analyzing these moral dilemmas. and getting, affirming that they are, by virtue of having passion, that gives them, that means they're going to produce something better than the machine.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think having it as a live practice dummy for that commentary, that could be very useful. I could see a coach pulling it up in a classroom, or whether it's live or in person or via Zoom, and simply having the AI listen to the presentation, or someone transcribes it. It provides that commentary and the team provides their response. And you could do the same thing with a judge back and forth. Get a team present their arguments and then get that live feedback and have to respond to it immediately as well. But you may also be right, and this is part of what Michael was getting at with the nuance and the moral intuition component. It may also validate the value of our direct experience and human wisdom. Maybe it'll do that, at least for now, until they continue to improve them. But for now, maybe we still have an edge, and it'll show that we have an edge when we engage it directly. Maybe. But very good. Thank you, Dick. Yes, Michael.
Well, just to echo some of the things that Richard brought up is I was amazed how much ChatGPT in particular lacks what I would call judgment, I guess human judgment, about understanding the arguments that it's generating in the context of the overall case. It doesn't seem to read the context clues of a case as intuitively, as aptly, I would say, as a lot of our students seem to do, even our middle school students. So the warning kids about its inability to understand context, and particularly the emotional context of many of the cases. It seemed to do better on cases where the case itself was based in actual events that have been happening recently, and it had a wide body of information to draw on in order to marshal perspectives that might be useful in the case. Whereas the fictional cases, like Sartorial Shuffle, where the protagonist Aaliyah has to wrestle with feedback from TikTok that she has, that her thrift flipping side job is really perpetuating structural inequities in that particular microeconomy. And just understanding what Aaliyah is concerned about there, with the accusations of fat phobia in the case, or the accusations of, she's impoverishing the selections of people who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So I thought it was interesting that it didn't do as well on those kind of cases so far in the experience that I've done.
Now, one of the discussion questions. Oh, go ahead, Janine, please.
Oh, it's me, Chris.
Chris,
Michael just made a really interesting comment about how the fictional cases that ChatGPT struggles with the fictional cases. And as someone who's been on the case writing committee for many years, it makes me think about how we need to write cases in the future.
Yeah, good point.
And maybe, yeah, so that we could write more fictional cases, or incorporate less real world, in order for students to do more thinking on their own, which is, I think, something that I also appreciate that Michael brought up. And because as a teacher or coach, we want to help students build agency and autonomy and confidence in their own thinking and reasoning.
Yeah, excellent point, Chris. I didn't even make that connection, that since it struggles with that type of case, why not have more of those? Excellent point. And Janine, you're muted by now. If you were making a point, making sure you weren't, but.
Hi, sorry. I agree with Chris regarding the fictional cases, but I think that this poses a problem for us because we're trying to have real world discussions, because students are living in the real world. And so I think that that causes a kind of tension. The other thing is that our focus really here is on the technology and not on the thinking. I mean, we're all either for or against the use of these tools, but it is a technology, and we seem to be more focused on the technology than on the arguments that we should be discussing. Is what I'm thinking about as we're continuing to talk about this.
So Janine, your encouragement there at the end, and I agree that it would be a drawback to have fewer of the real world cases. And one solution might be to have some sort of a twist where you've got a background framework of a real case, and you put some sort of a fictional twist on it that the machine couldn't handle. But your last encouragement there was that to focus this discussion more on the technology itself. Is that what?
Well, no, I think not on the technology. I think that what at the beginning of our conversation, you took out the bias parts, you took out all of these issues that are major issues. And I think that we actually are skirting those issues in this discussion. We're talking about bias. We're talking about the other issues out there that this is really not, we're not supposed to be talking about.
You can talk about that.
Okay.
And you're exactly right. We are flirting with a lot of that. So feel free to bring it right back in.
No, but I think you can't have a conversation with students without bringing those broader issues into the discussion about the use of AI tools in the ethics bowl.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it can also help highlight many of its limitations. So one of the questions that Michael asked was, I believe one of the discussion questions was, how can we help students understand and appreciate the limitations of using this and the benefits of using human autonomy, your own judgment? And another one was, how can we empower judges to recognize the sorts of answers and the sorts of responses that might be scripted from an AI generator? And I think Richard's point earlier, I think it was Richard's point, was that the fact that the teams will have to arrive at some sort of a consensus before they participate would preclude them from simply taking one, unscrupulous team members' AI generated responses and spitting them out, because we don't have any single person teams. It's always at least 2 or 3. So any thoughts on how we might be able to help judges see that and also encourage teams? I mean, is it just a matter of exposing those weaknesses and helping them work through that? Or exposing examples of that, addressing the coaches the best we can, and then asking the coaches to go further? And Greg, did you have a point there?
Well, for me, I've been so focused on AI and grading as an instructor. This is all new to me, and I'm trying to learn for the future here for our regional and training teams. But for grading, I've been focused on trying to adjust the weighting of my assignments so that less of the weighting is on the initial production and more on either specific requirements, or what I see in an ethics bowl is maybe the interaction part. The rubric for the ethics bowl is heavily weighted on the initial presentation and lightly weighted on the interaction or the responses to the judge's questions. But could we at least suggest that down the road we adjust that weighting?
Very much. That's an excellent idea. I'm glad we're having this conversation. So we could possibly deprioritize the weighting of the team's initial response to that question, which typically is just some sort of a variant on one of the discussion questions or something that you could anticipate, or in any case, tweak your pre-prepared script to match, and then elevate the weighting of the response to the other team's commentary, the commentary that you provide to the other team, as well as the judges' Q&A portion. So you train the judges to recognize it, you encourage the teams to not use it, and then you re-weight the score sheet. I think that's a very good idea. What do the rest of you think?
Here.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Love
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think part of what we're figuring out right now is just how to get ahead of this. it's here to stay, and it makes information finding so easy, and it makes a rough draft of a presentation so easy. And yet the thinking is still where we're superior as humans. And then figuring out how to incorporate maybe an emotional instinct or an emotional reaction into more of a recognition of what one thinks. That's the part where it's still on the kids to come up with their own arguments. But thinking about how we change our ways as educators in the future in response to this, pushing harder on the higher level thinking is really our challenge. And that idea of weighting more heavily with a conversation and that portion, I love that idea, because that's where we allow our kids' humanity to come forward and interact with other people. Because it's like with calculators, we have them, and now you don't have to really learn math facts. And that's okay. Kids are still able to do higher level thinking. The other thing that comes to mind is just there's Ethics Bowl and there's the classroom, and those things are different. And I think so often kids who come to Ethics Bowl come already as motivated students who enjoy thinking. And so our way of using this with them might be different than it would be, say, in the classroom, where you have kids who are so involved with activities that they're just trying to crank out a paper and get something done. So there are differentiations that we have to make also in terms of what kinds of students we're considering. And so keeping our own minds focused on Ethics Bowl is also helpful for this conversation.
Okay. That's, I think one of the points you were making there, Angela, is that since we have very special participants, abuse is going to be a lower risk than it would be for the typical teacher, a typical professor. And you get students that have to take distribution requirements. They don't want to be in this class. Please, ChatGPT, write this discussion board post for me. Please write a paper for me. But if it's an ethics bowler, that's a special kid. They're not doing that because they're being forced. They raise their hand. They're there because they want to be there. And so they're less likely to abuse it. That's a very good point.
Yep. Yeah.
Michael, one of the things that you said there or one of the questions you posed there toward the end of your presentation was, how can we address the inequities that could still exist in terms of students being able to access this? I would think that access, I mean, I'm sure there are some areas where internet access still is difficult. I know it's the case that I've had students that have to drive from a remote area to a McDonald's parking lot so they can connect to their Wi-Fi. I think that's less an access thing. It's more of an economic inequities things that they can't afford the access. But I think that you are also hinting on the point that AI plus a team is pretty good, but AI plus a really good coach plus a team is even better. So I made the brief case earlier that this was a sort of great equalizer, but it's not going to be an equalizer unless the really good teams with the really good coaches don't use it. If they do, there's still going to be inequities. Maybe they won't be as terrible, but.
Well, one of the ways that I think that it could be really helpful for students who don't have access to an experienced coach is to have perhaps a library of videos on YouTube where they have a group of students talking with an experienced coach about the output generated from an AI like ChatGPT on a particular ethics bowl case, where the experienced coach can ask questions that prompt critical analysis of that script and what might be missing. As Dick was pointing out earlier, like the emotional context that is, at least in the examples that I've generated so far, it just doesn't seem to have any kind of human understanding of the characters involved in the ethics bowl script. So, having an opportunity to see how an experienced coach pulls out that kind of skeptical thinking about the generated output And then kids could watch that at their leisure. A brand new coach who didn't know how to do Ethics Bowl very well could, pull kids together and push play on a playlist and stop and then discuss. I think for the kids who are on the hinterlands, we could say, of internet access, I'm thinking of homeless kids, or kids who are, their housing situation is tenuous, but might otherwise be great ethics bowlers. Their ability to maybe connect through a friend's mobile phone or something like that while having access to Wi-Fi at McDonald's and to watch something like that, just giving them an opportunity to gain access to what an experienced coach might be helping the students to think more critically, to think more, and just watching a discussion like that would be fun, where you could see the kids' reactions to some of the prompts generated by the AI and hear their reactions in real time. I think that would be really fun, and useful for those kids.
I agree. I think that something could be fairly easily produced and quickly produced, and I would think before next season. But Janine, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I have a question for everyone, and that is, our coaches are English teachers or history teachers. They are not philosophy teachers, who are the faculty coaches. And so are we talking about, say, the teachers themselves perhaps using AI in order to ground themselves in ethical theory? That's a question.
They could. They certainly could. I would think that a dedicated coach that realized their weaknesses, could use this. I mean, I mentioned earlier the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy Online. It's a wonderful resource. It doesn't put everything in layman's terms, but it certainly shortens huge conversations. A professor, or I'm sorry, a coach could access that in conjunction with one of these tools and learn a great deal in a hurry. So yeah, I think coaches could use it for sure, and they should.
Yeah, but I think that the allied to that are your schools in your various states, are they being coached by philosophers, or are they being coached by English teachers who are volunteering, or history teachers? That's in Michigan. Those are the two teachers, in terms of their subject areas, who are coaching the Ethics Bowl along with our philosopher coaches from Michigan. But that I'm curious about that.
Social studies, history, contemporary issues. From my experience, it's usually not a philosophy teacher. That's more at the private school. For public schools in Tennessee, they don't have philosophy teachers in public schools. So I think the point you're getting at there is that's the direct coaching for the coaches and how to use the tool with their teams. That would be beneficial. That would be a way to maybe amplify the benefits faster than trying to coach the students directly. But we only had a couple minutes left, and Michael, we were good enough to go ahead and draft a potential guideline that you shared earlier. I wonder if you could reshare that now so the group could think about it real quick before we close out.
Yeah, I just need access to the sharing option again.
Okay. All right, making you a host again.
Okie dokie.
Now, after this conversation, I'm not so sure we'll have to have stringent guidelines that say use it now or don't use it then. I think if we show folks the benefits and the drawbacks, it would be, prudent to use it in a certain way. But please share your draft guideline.
Well, here's one that I came up with, and it's sort of the equalizer, addressing the equalizer concern. And it's also a follow-up to the question that Alex Sager asked. And I think equity and access concerns were in part what motivated his question. So, and again, this is off the top of my head, so I'm sure it could be wordsmithed to be much more eloquent than what I've put it here. AI scripts for Ethics Bowl should be generated using commonly available prompt sets that have been tested by ethical organizers and coaches to consistently produce reliable, easily understandable and usable formats so that students everywhere can test their initial ideas on an ethical case as a means of improving their performance. So one of the things I've noticed so far in my 5 in-depth experience that I've done is I can give ChatGPT the same exact prompt from one case to the next, but the format of the output that it gives me sometimes varies. Not always significantly, but and it makes me wonder, this is going to require some ongoing testing just to see experimentally if we put 10 ethics bowl coaches in the same room with the same scripts or the same prompt sets on the same case, and we all entered it in at the same time, would we all get the same results or somewhat very similar results? And that's just a question about the way the data set or the drivers that the AI has been trained on. Another question or a guideline that I would like to see in the any document related to using AI generators is that students should always critically scrutinize the output of the generator for potentially misleading and factually incorrect model scripts, and to emphasize that students thinking together on their own are likely to produce more nuanced arguments and supporting ideas. And just to emphasize that the coaches and the ethics bowl organizers who have tested these, give them a bit of a warning that what you're likely to get isn't necessarily guaranteed to score you a good argument with another team or impress a judge.
I guess those are excellent guidelines. The first one, the key was that the prompts were tested by coaches and organizers. And that's a direction I didn't necessarily expect the conversation to go, or a conclusion I didn't expect us to arrive at. But if we're going to turn this tool loose, and it's already turned loose, it's on us to go in and see what works, what doesn't work, so that teams aren't led astray, so they can get maximum value. And at the same time, give them a healthy dosage of scrutiny. Make sure, or skepticism, make sure you scrutinize its outputs. Make sure you discuss with your colleagues, your teammates, and arrive at some sort of a consensus you can actually endorse. Don't consider this thing an authority to be deferred to. Excellent. Excellent. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank all of you for coming out on a Sunday evening or late afternoon, depending on where you are. What a cool, diverse group that came out. I want to thank you, Michael, for your wonderful preparation. Angela, Janine, Dick, Greg, and Chris, you've all been wonderful contributors. I very much appreciate it. I owe you. If I could do anything for you, please let me know. And again, we'll host or we'll post this recording at ethicsbowl.org along with a brief article. We'll get that up early next week. I'll send it to each of you. Please send it to your Ethics Bowl friends and colleagues and coaches and whatnot. And maybe we can get the community discussing this, because goodness knows they're going to have some better ideas than just this small group.
Yeah. Thank you for your leadership, Matt.
Thank you, Matt, so much, as always.
Yeah.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you all.
Good
All right,
to see you all.
here's to a great week ahead.
Woohoo!
Cheers.
Bye.